This is Epic Book Recaps, a podcast that offers complimentary audio summaries of influential nonfiction books, making learning a smarter experience. My Age of Anxiety by Scott Stossel. Scott has a problem. On the surface, Scott could be considered an embodiment of success, a married man with 2 children, running a successful magazine, and penning his first significant book. However, beneath this veil of accomplishment, Scott is fighting an internal battle, a battle that has been raging since he was 2 years old. From that tender age, a crippling sense of anxiety began to permeate his life, establishing an omnipresent dwelling in his mind and body. While sporadic bouts of anxiety are commonplace in human life, Scott's struggle extends far beyond this. His experience falls within the realm of a full-blown anxiety disorder, a condition that has seen him abandon dates, exams, job interviews, and flights midway due to the intensity of his anxiety. It even managed to overshadow significant life events such as his wedding and the birth of his first child, and it extends into mundane activities such as a simple stroll down the street. Scott's battle is not merely against an issue. It is a fight against a rampant disaster. To add to the woes of his anxiety disorder, he grapples with a smorgasbord of other problems: persistent stomach complications and headaches, acrophobia, mysophobia, turophobia, aviophobia, and even emetophobia. Over 4 decades of living under the shadow of anxiety has led Scott on an exhaustive quest for a remedy. His search has seen him wade through years of psychotherapy and hypnosis, meditation, and an assortment of pills. His extensive personal experience and thorough scientific research have come together in his book, where he raises questions like, what is anxiety? Why is our era so plagued by it? He invites readers on a journey to unravel the mystery of anxiety. How anxious is our world today? The 21st century is a time of heightened anxiety. This isn't a baseless claim or a simple feeling many share. It is a fact substantiated by extensive research. Currently, anxiety disorders hold the notorious title of being the most prevalent mental health issue worldwide, even outpacing depression. Nearly 1 in 7 Americans, which is approximately 40 million people, wrestle with some form of anxiety. The financial burden of anxiety on the mental health care budget in the U.S. is staggering, accounting for about 1/3 of total expenditure. This, coupled with businesses losing billions due to increased employee anxiety, paints a grim picture. Despite these statistics, anxiety was not even recognized as a clinical category until recently. The study of anxiety formally began during the 1980s when neuroscientists discovered the amygdala, a small part of our brain responsible for processing fear and related emotions and behaviors. However, the blame cannot be solely attributed to this organ for the widespread prevalence of anxiety. The truth lies in the fact that our lifestyle and societal changes over recent decades have significantly contributed to the rise in anxiety. Moderate anxiety can potentially enhance performance and creativity. During the medieval ages, our ancestors' primary concern was their daily survival. It would be logical to assume this constant fight for existence would make them anxious. However, the absence of social mobility and technological advancements provided a certain predictability, which offered comfort. Fast forward to the present day where survival is significantly easier, but our anxiety levels continue to escalate. In today's world, an overabundance of choices and the constant need to adapt to new roles and technologies act as fuel for our anxiety. The freedom we once yearned for seems to have turned on us. This is the paradox of choice. With increasing freedom to choose, our anxiety levels also rise. Renowned neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky suggests that dynamic and fluid political systems can breed more anxiety than static ones. In reality, anxiety has become an inherent part of the human condition, shaped by a complex interplay of biological, social, and cultural factors. It's ingrained in us as individuals and as a collective society. This leads us to critical questions. Are we destined to feel anxiety from birth due to our genes and environment? Is there a cure? The challenge to characterize anxiety. Where do we even start with defining anxiety? Even today, there is no universally accepted definition for this condition. Philosophers such as Soren Kierkegaard perceive it as a spiritual and philosophical issue rather than a physical one. This perspective is embodied in the Danish word angst, signifying a feeling of unease without a discernible cause. On the other hand, Charles Darwin, the father of evolutionary theory, had a contrasting view. A person plagued by anxiety himself, Darwin proposed that anxiety is an adaptive response that humans have developed throughout the course of evolution. According to his theory, our ancestors initially experienced anxiety as an automatic physical reaction to threats in their environment. This reaction spurred humans to respond to danger, thereby enhancing our chances of survival. In essence, anxiety served as our biological alarm clock. Anxiety triggers the fight or flight response, aiding us in escaping or confronting dangers. However, can we say that we only feel anxious in the face of real-life threats in the 21st century? The answer is a resounding no. Modern-day anxiety often borders on the pathological and is usually disproportionate to the magnitude of the perceived threat. Our primitive evolutionary response doesn't quite fit within the confines of modern civilization. Darwin is not the only contributor to theories on anxiety. Currently, there are 4 primary theoretical perspectives and treatment approaches. First, psychoanalytic. This approach, heavily influenced by Freud, views anxiety as a result of repressed conflicts, usually associated with taboo thoughts. Therapy aims to bring these conflicts to consciousness and resolve them by seeking deep insights from the psyche. Second, behaviorist. This perspective perceives anxiety as a conditioned fear response, where we learn to fear harmless situations. Treatment involves exposure therapy and cognitive restructuring to reprogram the brain's response to fear. Third, biomedical. This approach delves into the biological basis of anxiety, studying brain structures and neurotransmitters. Medication addresses the biochemical aspects of anxiety. Fourth, experiential. This perspective considers anxiety as a reaction to threats to self-esteem or psyche. Therapy focuses on relaxation techniques and exploring deep-seated existential concerns. Struggling to navigate between these approaches, Scott sought guidance from his therapist for his understanding of anxiety and its treatment. Dr. W suggests that while these approaches diverge, they often intersect in his practice. He believes that the root of anxiety is an existential crisis that every human grapples with when confronted with inevitable problems such as loss, aging, and death. In this context, anxiety serves as a protective shield against confronting these challenges directly. This emotion presents a window into our deepest fears and desires as human beings. Confronting our fears. In addition to his general sense of worry about everything, Scott also suffers from specific phobias. Emetophobia, a pathological fear of vomiting, is one of his most formidable fears. This phobia holds an irrational and overpowering grip on him. Despite not having vomited for over 35 years, this phobia dominates a significant portion of his daily thoughts. This creates a vicious feedback loop. Physical symptoms such as stomach aches and bowel issues amplify his anxiety, and in turn, the heightened anxiety exacerbates these physical symptoms. Fear sharpens the senses. Anxiety paralyzes them. Tilda Kurt Goldstein. Scott's main 2 phobias extend beyond his physiological organs. They primarily revolve around social situations. These fears range from public speaking to casual social interactions. Considering that Scott's writing career often requires him to face the public, his coping mechanism is far from healthy. A cocktail of benzodiazepines and alcohol helps reduce his anxiety to a level of manageable discomfort. If your heart rate quickens, you start shaking and sweating when speaking publicly, you might have a social phobia. The concept of social anxiety disorder didn't exist before the 1980s, but current research suggests that it now affects millions of Americans. Even public figures are not immune to these challenges. Barbra Streisand refrained from public performances for nearly 3 decades due to performance anxiety, and Hugh Grant relied on lorazepam to get through filming. Regardless of our status, we're all susceptible to social phobia and often resort to extreme measures to manage our fears. Our bodies react faster than our brains can rationalize. This phenomenon results from the rapid social judging mechanism instilled in us by evolution. Our ancestors subconsciously evaluated their alignment with social groups and norms, which helped them avoid danger and survive. However, we misapply these instincts in modern contexts, leading to baseless social phobias. Yet, some workplaces necessitate managing anxieties and phobias. For instance, militaries throughout history have recognized the importance of anxiety management. War is a consistently high-stress environment where anxiety management directly influences a soldier's professional success. While modern militaries undergo special training, substance use is a common method to suppress anxiety. For instance, Vikings used stimulants based on deer urine, while the British preferred rum to combat battlefield fear. Even the bravest among us are susceptible to fear and can crumble in the face of danger. Can medication provide salvation? Scott was always a nervous child, frequently succumbing to panic attacks and bouts of anxiety at home, school, and even during sports sessions. By the time he was 10 years old, the anxiety had escalated to such an extent that he had stopped socializing with his friends and rarely left his house. That's when his father started making emergency trips to the drugstore for tranquilizers. Scott began taking them regularly, along with a type of antidepressants. Despite the constant foggy feeling and dehydration, he finally gained some control over his anxiety. From that point onward, Scott has been on some form of medication to manage his condition. During a particularly challenging year, his therapist prescribed him Paxil, a new SSRI antidepressant at the time. The transformation in his life was almost immediate. He woke up feeling energetic, felt less fatigued during the day, stopped experiencing panic attacks, and even saw an improvement in his phobias. This seemed like a dream come true until he took a flight. A brief bout of turbulence triggered a major flashback, trembling hands, motion sickness, and a fear of crashing. Not long after, his anxiety levels began to rise again. Strong stimuli can bypass even medication-adjusted brain chemistry to induce intense anxiety. Scott continued to take Paxil for another 6 years, but it had no effect on his condition. It was time to try something new. After discontinuing Paxil, he took a short break before trying another antidepressant. The withdrawal effects were more than Scott could handle. He could barely last a week and has since not gone a single day without an antidepressant. When these medications were introduced in the market, the healthcare industry hailed them as a savior. Barbiturates and tranquilizers became an instant hit in America. Drugs transformed into a cultural phenomenon. Everyone from homemakers to movie stars was hooked. The market also saw the introduction of a cure for panic disorder. Xanax quickly became the most commercially successful prescription drug in history. But when has life ever been exempt from stress? Should there be a pill for every mood and occasion? Tilda, the New York Academy of Medicine. However, if drugs are the universal cure, why does humanity still suffer from these disorders? The market saw the introduction of antidepressants, but the incidence of depression has risen by 1,000% since then. If medication is not the solution, what is? Did you know? Even Sigmund Freud heavily relied on medication to manage his anxiety, and even prescribed cocaine to all his patients as a magic drug. The battle between genes and environment. So what fuels our anxiety? Are we prisoners of our genes, or do our surroundings shape us? Scott found answers in his own journey. Scott has been an anxious individual for as long as he can remember, but something new emerged when he was 6. He started experiencing separation anxiety and developed a fear of vomiting. These phobias began to spiral out of control. Research suggests that if a child develops a phobia at an early age, there is an 85% chance that they will suffer from an anxiety disorder as adults. This was the first indication of the path that Scott's life was going to take. For years, Scott lived under the constant fear that his parents would die or abandon him, and that he wouldn't return home after work. His mother was overprotective but not affectionate, which only exacerbated his dependency and feelings of being unloved. A child's early relationship with their mother significantly impacts them as adults. The first anxiety we experience as infants is the fear of losing our mother's care and love. Depending on our mother's reactions, we develop our attachment styles, as studied by psychologist John Bowlby. These styles, secure, ambivalent, and avoidant, greatly influence our adult relationships and anxiety levels. Children with secure attachments generally display lower anxiety levels, higher self-esteem, and independence as adults compared to those with ambivalent or avoidant attachments. Analyzing our childhood attachments can help us understand our adult anxieties. Observing the impact of his parents' attitude on him as a child, Scott adopted a different approach with his own children. However, the influence of genes couldn't be completely eliminated. His children inevitably developed anxiety disorders similar to his own. Scott's daughter acquired a vomiting phobia around the same age he did, while his son experienced the same separation anxiety. Both children exhibited a shy, neurotic temperament. Despite growing up in different environments, 3 generations of his family shared the same pattern of anxiety. Research indicates that no single gene can make us anxious. However, genes can make us more prone to disorders, and our environment can contribute to their development. Fast forward 40 years, Scott has learned to live with his condition and even sees value in his disorder. After all, creative geniuses like Franz Kafka, Marcel Proust, and Woody Allen found that anxiety fueled their art. Anxiety can enhance people's performance if channeled towards the right cause. In the end, individuals with anxiety can handle a lot and become more resilient due to their experiences. Scott is not alone in his struggle. Anxiety disorders are increasingly prevalent worldwide. If you encounter people suffering from this condition, remember that experiencing anxiety goes beyond just worrying about daily issues. It is a condition deeply rooted in biology, psychology, and environment. While medications can provide temporary relief, they aren't a cure-all. Scott's journey reminds us that pills alone can't eliminate anxiety. Instead, we should all delve deeper into our entrenched fears and their origins. With the right approach, anxiety can transition from a burden to a tool that fuels our resilience and creativity. What you can do. If you experience severe symptoms of anxiety, seek professional help. If you're on medication for any mental health condition, always consider additional options, including therapeutic interventions and mindfulness practices. Reflect on your childhood experiences. You might be able to identify some of your anxiety triggers there. Embrace anxiety as a part of you and channel it into creative and constructive outlets,